Once there was a woman, kind, talented, a mother. She lived quietly with her children and husband until something changed. Jealousy crept in from her own blood. One day they tricked her, and by nightfall, she was gone. They said it was an accident, but the whispers began. That her soul could not rest, that it returned to the house each night, to see her children, to find what was taken, to finish what was never allowed to end. You've heard stories like this. Maybe not this one, but something close. A voice in the dark, a feeling in an empty room, a presence that shouldn't be there, but somehow is. And in those stories, one idea repeats. The soul survives. It waits. It wanders. But what does that really mean? To die and still remain? Let's follow the feeling behind the story. Because when someone dies, what shocks you is not only the biology. It's the way a person can vanish while the world still looks intact. The room is the same. The body is the same. But the someone you knew is no longer accessible. And the mind tries to explain that gap. For thousands of years, we've given it a name, soul, not only in religion or ritual, but in fear, memory, imagination. The soul becomes the shape we pour that gap into. And if we trace how the soul becomes something to fear, we start to see why so many cultures independently arrived at the same kinds of ghost stories. The earliest humans likely didn't fear the soul. They feared death. And to make sense of it, many imagined the dead as changed, not erased. In many cultures, the dead were not gone, just transformed. They became ancestors, guides, watchers. The soul was something to be respected, not avoided. But something shifted when a life ended in the wrong way. A death that felt sudden, violent, unfair, a right left undone, a goodbye never spoken. When people died like that, their memory felt heavy, unfinished. And so, the soul became more than connection. It became disturbance. Why does this death feel wrong? Why do we still feel them around? What if they are not at peace? So fear crept in, not of the soul as an evil force, but of the unfinished emotional weight carried by the living. Across cultures, the pattern repeats. Offerings placed to keep the dead calm, graves sealed or blessed to prevent return. Rites performed to help the soul move on. Not because the soul was a monster, but because the death felt unresolved. Some were feared because they had suffered, others because they had been forgotten. The soul, once a symbol of continuity, became a reminder of what hadn't been said, what hadn't been done, what couldn't be undone. And in that sense, the restless soul is often a mirror, not a supernatural enemy, but a reflection of unfinished grief inside the living. We say things like, his soul is restless, or her spirit is angry, as if emotions can travel beyond the body, as if grief, hunger, or revenge can keep breathing after the brain stops. But can that be true? From what science understands, emotions are not free-floating forces. They are events generated by a living nervous system, by circuits that process threat, loss, reward, attachment. They depend on a functioning brain, on metabolism, on the body staying alive. When the system shuts down, the machinery of experience shuts down with it. The heart stops. The brain loses oxygen. Electrical activity fades. Cells begin to break down. If something survives as a conscious soul, what would it feel with? What would it remember with? Without a brain, there is no known mechanism for thought, memory, or emotion. No known platform for a personal you to continue running. And yet, we still picture the soul wandering, thirsty, vengeful, watching. Maybe because the emotions aren't the soul's. Maybe they're ours. If you've walked into a house after a death, you know the effect. The same air, the same light, the same furniture, but your mind makes the absence loud. Feeling thickens into presence. When science removes the wandering soul, many try to save the idea by changing its form. They say, the soul isn't memory, it isn't emotion, it's pure energy. It sounds modern, almost scientific, because yes, physics tells us energy is conserved, but in science, Energy has a specific meaning. It's the capacity to do work. It powers motion and heat and chemical change. It's measurable, predictable, governed by laws, but it doesn't come with identity attached. No evidence shows energy storing a personality or carrying a private inner life across death. So what's happening when people call the soul energy? Often, it's a translation, taking the feeling of presence and giving it a word that sounds durable. Here's a simpler way to see the mistake. Think of a television. Electricity powers the circuits. A picture appears. The picture is not inside the electricity. It's what the system produces while it's running. Unplug the TV. The electricity doesn't stop existing in the universe, but the show doesn't float away into the room. It ends because the pattern that made it is gone. That's the category error. Confusing fuel with the experience fuel makes possible. The self, the soul as we imagine it, was never the energy. It was the pattern, the organization, the living process that produced I am. So yes, the energy in a body disperses into heat, chemistry, the world around it. But the person is not a quantity of energy. A person is a specific organization of matter and information, held together by constant maintenance. When the maintenance ends, the pattern ends. At the moment of death, something undeniable happens. The body, still warm, still whole, becomes unreachable. Not physically, organs remain, cells remain, but the person is no longer there to respond. And so we ask the oldest question in a new form. Did something leave? Science so far sees no reproducible trace of a departing essence, no field, no measurable signature. What changes are the ordinary things: heat, gases, chemical balance, control. And from that change, consciousness ends, not because it flew away, but because the process that produced it stopped. That's the hardest part to accept, because it means restless souls may not be entities moving through space. They may be the way living minds carry unfinished emotion and mistake its intensity for presence. And still, this doesn't make the soul meaningless, because even if the soul isn't something that travels after death, the idea of it reveals something real about us. We are the kind of creatures who can feel absence as if it were a thing, who can carry someone inside memory so vividly that the mind turns it into a presence. Maybe the soul doesn't go anywhere when we die, because its deepest role was never to travel. Its role was to name the center of experience while it exists. The part that loves, the part that wonders, the part that suffers and tries to make sense of suffering. And for the time it is here, it is the most intimate reality we ever know.